TED Talks. We'd like to welcome Christy Honeycutt. Special seats up front just for you. So, as I said, welcome to TED Talks number 3, our recruiting hacks. First off, a special thanks to our fearless organizer, Angela Lee. What we have today for you, a real treat, the best and brightest of everyone who volunteered to bring us some of the tips and tricks that have made them successful in their time here at FutureStep with recruiting, negotiating with clients, and negotiating with candidates. First off, we have our very own Rich Russo from Operations. He comes to us live from our very own brand new command center, and I'm sure you all went on the tour this afternoon, each one of you.
If not, we'll do the tour again. Thanks, guys. So wanted to just go over some slides real quick, and as soon as we get them up, all right, Angela's going to pull them up. As a caveat, you may see things in here that you've heard before or heard from someone else. I'm not trying to claim these are mine, but I have found them to be extremely helpful when executing an engagement. So I want to talk about 3 topics: comforting words, starting smart, and eating the frog. When we're talking with clients, candidates, and sources, there's a few phrases that I found that are really helpful to instill a little bit of comfort in them, that we're on their side and we're in this. And in fact, with clients, I like to say we're in this together. When I talk to sources, I like to mention that I'm interested in their expertise and their guidance. Kind of stroke their ego a little bit, make them a little bit sympathetic to what I'm about to ask them. And then for candidates, even though we represent our clients, I do like to try to put myself in their shoes and give them a little coaching and guidance about whether or not this is the right next step in their career. Sometimes it helps, you sort of come around the same side of the table as the candidate, and they see that you're in this together, learning about the company, the role, their background, and whether or not this is the right next step. Because as we all know, it's not just going to affect them, but their families and ultimately the company that they go to. So it's an important step. So I like to use these comforting words with each of these 3 different audiences. A little bit on starting smart. Anybody here work in IT or in the utilities industry? You know, when you call a candidate, if you say Mumbatus or SAP or C-Pound, they're going to know you're a recruiter that doesn't understand their industry. So just for those following along, millions of BTUs is a measure of thermal capacity that when you talk to utilities executives, they measure their assets with those. SAP is the term we use in the United States. They do call it SAP in Europe. So depending on where you are, that may be applicable. And C-Pound or C#, or is really C-sharp.
C-tic-tac-toe symbol sometimes.
C-tic-tac-toe, yeah. That's a programming language. So know the language of the industry and the language of the skills that you're looking at. Also know your target. And this is something I see at FutureStep a lot. We do a very good job of understanding what is the 4 or 5 things that I need to go after and find in a candidate. And often I see people do something like this where they put down what those particular items are. I would like to extend this just a little bit. Besides knowing the big things that your client is looking for, in this case we've got a finance and accounting role. It was actually for a chief accounting officer that I did a few years back. What I want you to challenge yourself is to make sure at least one of these is what's going to cause your client to pull the trigger and make a hire. Anybody guess on these what the trigger is? What does my client really want to hear? In this case, it was a chief accounting officer, a company that was installing a financial system. They had to restate their financials. Their general ledger took ridiculous long time to close. So I knew if I had candidates that had a lot of this experience, but they really nailed shortening the time to close the books, that was what was going to get a client interested and ultimately make them pull the trigger on a candidate. So always be mindful of what's the most important thing in their mind that's going to get them to buy. Next is on calling. I like to use the 3-3-3 rule. Our first calls, when you get a search, it's normal, I think, to want to go and start calling candidates and get out in the market. I would challenge you to do some slightly different approach. First 3 calls. Call people in future step who have done this role before. Maybe it's a recruiter, maybe it's a researcher, maybe it was an engagement manager or project director. But find out a little about where they went, what the search strategy was, what they heard in the market. That may lead you to other engagements. May lead you to some information about the candidate pool and what to expect. Next, make your next 3 calls to sources. Typically when people say, oh, you need to call sources, we always think about going up. But you also may need to go down. So I'll give you an example. I did a project director role in the chemicals industry. Instead of calling vice presidents of construction and operations, I called all of the lower level roles for plant managers and got their opinions on what makes a good plant manager, what makes a good project director. In this particular case, this company was building a new chemical facility. So I called about 30, and I kind of broke the rule, I called about 30 construction managers and said, when you're building a plant, what do you want to see in your project director? Who are the good project directors out there that you would work for again? That gave me a lot of information around the target I was looking for. Also think about the value chain of what you're recruiting for. Another chemical industry example. This particular company took, they made a product called carbon black. It's what gets added to tires to make them more durable. It also appears in lots of other rubber items. Well, it turns out they sell that product to tire manufacturers. So what all I was looking for was a VP of operation, or sorry, a VP of sales for carbon black. I went and called all of the people a little bit further down the value chain, the heads of procurement and the heads of engineering. Who is selling products to you? How do they approach you? What are you looking for? What is interesting? Who do you think has a good story to tell about how they're solving your problem with their product? That led me to the best VPs of sales. So think about the value chain, think about going up and down. Lastly, I make my next 3 calls to B-level candidates. These are people I don't think are going to get the job. It helps me get my pitch down, helps me deal with what questions they might have, helps point out maybe I didn't do enough research on the company or the role, gives me a chance to get those questions worked out in my own mind so that when I call my A-level candidates, I've got a great story and I can hit it hard. Just some ideas on that. Last one with a minute to go is called Eat the Frog. There are things that we have to do every day that we don't like to do. My recommendation, eat the frog. Do that the first thing that you do in the morning, and after that, everything else is easy. Here's some examples of how you can eat the frog. I like to make calls first thing in the morning. So I work really hard on research the night before, so when I come in the morning, I can grab 30 or 40 calls right away, get that wave of calls out. The eating the frog part for me comes on the day before, trying to generate all of those names, figure out what are the names that are really worth calling. Sometimes administrative items can be an eat the frog thing. How many people leave status reports to the last minute, or updating the ATS system or Searcher Express? Absolutely. So recognize that about yourself. You say, you know what, hell with it. For an hour, I'm going to grind through and get all these administrative items done, and then I'm going to go back to the fun of recruiting. Another area where you may want to, where you may want to eat the frog is when you're interviewing somebody. I know we've been taught behavioral interview questions. Tell me about a time when. I want to extend that slightly. It's not don't ever say that. It's just don't ever leave it up to the candidate to tell you what their pre-rehearsed story is. You think about that role where I was talking with somebody about a chief accounting officer role and their ability to shorten the time to close the books. I want you to tell me about a time when you had to implement a new system change and you were fearful that your vendors might not be able to meet your timeline. Or tell me about a time when you made a change to the general ledger that required the business unit controllers to do something different. How did you introduce that change? What did you do? What were you looking for? How did they react? Steer them in the direction you want. Just don't let them go back to their pre-rehearsed and canned response. Okay. And then the last eat the frog thing is turnoffs. always tough when you do a search. I did a lot of work on the executive search side. We typically send in 3 to 5 candidates that are all great. Otherwise, we wouldn't send them in. But the truth is, the client usually only picks one. Every once in a while, they get lucky and they pick 2. But you're always calling a few folks saying, sorry, Charlie, I thought you were good enough. You did well with the client, but you're not the winner. That's a hard conversation to have. Don't shy away from it, though. And I would make those calls as fast as possible. What you'll find is people appreciate hearing back. So few recruiters call their candidates back and turn them off. And poor candidates left wondering, was it me? Was it them? Did they forget me? What's going on? Was I supposed to follow up or not? Who's a bad taste in their mouth? So have the courage to call people back. As soon as you know my client's making a hire, and yes, I'm cleared to turn these folks off, call them right back. Use it as an opportunity to give them some truth, some straight talk, and start making a connection with them about their next role, and that you'll keep them on your radar. If you eat the frog in these couple of areas, your day will go much better. So guys, there's some tips on getting started, some comforting words, and eating the frog. Thank you very much.